Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. We've got another terrific episode today. We're going to go into some great topics we have. A lot of them, people sometimes complain that there's too much Twitter beefs, but there's no Twitter beefs. But a lot of them are based on viral Twitter posts I've had. And a lot of it is continuing some of the discussions we had last week. So the first thing I want to bring up is military vet culture, or vet culture as a brand that is, best embodied in Black Rifle Coffee. Last week, I was actually, I think, the first one to notice this, but Black Rifle Coffee had this big profile in the New York Times. It was written in a stereotypical way of like the New York Times trying to be a hit piece, but they're letting them speak for themselves. It's not, otherwise it's not a total demonization of Black Rifle Coffee. It just lets them say what they want to say. But there are these cheap shots put in there. Nick Fuentes is mentioned, and it's like a white nationalist troll, he's called. I think one of the funniest things is they call Jack Posobiec alt-right in the article. And there's these other asides that you can see what's the journalist's point. In any case, the article goes into one of the chief points of the article is like saying, it's building this massive brand geared up towards conservatives and to vets. And at the same time, it's trying to keep certain fans away, or a certain base of people away from its product. Namely racist and anti-Semites and extremists. All these nasty types. And people who like Kyle Rittenhouse. Famously, Black Rifle Coffee last year, there was Kyle Rittenhouse got out of jail, was wearing some Black Rifle Coffee gear, and the company denounced Rittenhouse and forced, the person who posted, I believe, is Elijah Schaefer, to delete all the mentions of Black Rifle Coffee with Kyle Rittenhouse and denounce him. And people got very mad about this. But people in this article, they doubled down on that condemnation. But at the same time, one of the zip tie guy from the Capitol protests was wearing Black Rifle merch when he was walking around the Capitol. They got attacked for that, and they were much more hesitant to condemn the Capitol protesters because they know what happened with the backlash that occurred when they attacked Kyle Rittenhouse. So you think that they've learned their lesson. They realize that their fans have views that are not politically correct, even though the funniest thing about Black Rifle Coffee, it became popular by being the politically incorrect coffee brand, because that's the most important thing when I'm drinking coffee, is to drink politically incorrect coffee. They will bend the knee when libs get mad about them having any connection to Kyle Rittenhouse. So in this article, you think they learn, and then they are, changing. And then at the end, they have Evan Hoffer go off on Kyle Rittenhouse fans. Even though in the article, this may be his claim from this is that it was, the journalist took his comments out of context. He wasn't condemning Kyle Rittenhouse supporters. He was just talking about racists and anti-Semites. And he just went on this whole Reddit expletive thread about the funny thing, it's New York Times, so everything is like expletive. It's like, expletive, hate these people. These people are absolute scum. They're the worst people on the planet Earth. I would pay them for them to not buy my product or not be associated with my product, and I don't want anything to do with them. And the funny thing is, New York Times suggests, like, how about you do a Black Lives Matter themed, merch? Because that would really drive the racists away. And then he realized, that would alienate too many people. So I don't want to do that. That's not what we're about. So he has a realization that he can't alienate them too far. But those comments, along with he also made a statement that, they were considering doing some product with Saint Michael, the Archangel, as, one of these things. I think it was like a mug or some type of design that they're working with Saint Michael. And hopefully you guys know who Saint Michael is, but Saint Michael is one of the main figures in Christian civilization. I don't know if there's anything wrong with an archangel defeating Satan, but apparently there is. So the Pentagon told them, when they're making this design are a friend in the Pentagon. They say they're like white supremacists are using Saint Michael as one of their symbols because him trampling Satan resembles Derek Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck, and thus it's racist, so don't use it. So they discontinue the line, essentially saying the Pentagon told us St. Michael is racist, so we're not going to use him anymore. St. Michael is the patron saint of soldiers, and so he's always been a big military figure for centuries, and especially with the American military. And Black Rifle Coffee is obviously geared to vets, so this is something that they would like, and to be, a natural thing that they want to promote. I mean, they promote all this goofy 1776 stuff that's geared to soldiers. Might as well do something about St. Michael. But they won't allow it because the Pentagon says that's racist. So both of these comments are obviously going to rile up people, especially their conservative base that buys all their product, particularly them saying, and in the context of the article, it was saying those who like Kyle Rittenhouse, those who sympathize with Kyle Rittenhouse's actions, or those who, may want to defend what he did in Kenosha last year. They were making this message: we don't want you to buy our product. We think you're the worst of the worst, the biggest scum in this country, and we will pay you not to buy our product and not to be associated with our product. This was their message. And also, by the way, we think St. Michael is a white supremacist symbol because the Pentagon says so. This is the message of this profile, and Black Rifle Coffee thought this was a great profile. They tweeted it from the social media accounts. They were promoting it. They seemed very happy with this article, and yet this backlash happened. And I believe I was the first one to tweet out the quotes. I didn't see anyone really tweeting it out, and then I believe I quote tweeted this stuff out on Thursday or Wednesday, and then the next day I saw Andy Nguyen and Mike Cernovich making a big deal about it, using some of the same quotes, but making a big deal about it. I can't claim copyright on being the first to call it, but I think I was the first to draw attention to it. So then it led to the snowball effect, and everyone's threatening to boycott Black Rifle Coffee. And there's articles being written about them and conservative media attacking them. And Evan Haver then gives Hoffer. I mean, I can't really find the way to pronounce his name, so I believe in German it would be Hoffer. So I'm going to call him Hoffer. He then gives this message. He goes on Instagram. He's like, there's a lot of misinformation going around. I want to say, I'm a conservative. Of course, I love conservatives. I want you to be one of us. I love the Black Rifle Coffee experience. My comments were just against racists and anti-Semites because they attack me because I'm Jewish. And it's like, okay, this is dumb. And then even the St. Michael thing, he had some BS response saying that, like, we consider hundreds of ideas, and it just was an idea that didn't make it through. And it was all, damage control that he was doing. Understandably so, because the impression that they're attacking his own, consumer base is a major deal. So he has to go out and do damage control. And I don't think it's going to do anything. Even with the comments that, him saying that these, far-right extremists are the worst of the worst, and the company still sticking by their denunciation of Kyle Rittenhouse and his supporters does indicate where their sympathies lie, where their principles lie. And I don't think that's necessary. And this is a company that's not... there were some conservatives who were arguing for them, saying, they made one mistake and now you want to boycott them. That's awful. The whole company's purpose is to provide an alternative to major corporations that do that make all these terrible statements, that also condemn alleged racists and alleged extremists and people who hate Black Lives Matter. They condemn all these people. They condemn conservatives. So they turn to Black Rifle or Coffee to say, I'm going to support people who share my values. But they're clearly saying in this article that we don't share the values of a lot of our customers, and we don't want them a part of our company. We don't want them buying our company. We don't want them supporting our company. We just want vets who are down with multiculturalism, who are down with maybe open to Black Lives Matter, but they just like to shoot guns and have bacon and drink whiskey, and that's just what we're about. Those are our values. We don't, we don't see race here, and we actually believe in racial justice matters. They don't necessarily go that far as he was saying in his comments about not wanting to do a black BLM themed merch. But I mean, it's almost there. And also throughout the article, the New York Times makes the point that Haver is, doesn't seem comfortable with Trump anymore. He doesn't seem to like Trump, and he seems glad he's gone. But the reporter tries to push him on it, but he's smart enough not to say anything about Trump because, of course, his whole consumer base loves Trump. So this is the company that they have. And I think it is right to boycott them. I mean, Black Rifle Coffee is cringe. Their whole point is providing this politically incorrect alternative to, Folgers or what, I guess Folgers and Starbucks Starbucks, of course, is supporting Black Lives Matter, and Starbucks is what they're supposed to be an alternative to. And if they're, shitting on their own people, what's the point of supporting them? They depend on conservatives and they have to placate them, not the other way around. It's not like, oh wow, thanks for providing a great service to us. No, conservatives would just go back to, drinking Folgers and Starbucks, not having to worry about, we're supporting some good company when they realize that this is not a good company. So there's no reason to support Black Rifle Coffee if they're calling you the worst of the worst in society and that we want nothing to do with you. So with that message in mind, conservatives are just replying in kind. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but people like Eric Erickson and others decide that you must support Black Rifle Coffee. You must drink their products even though they think you're a racist piece of shit. I don't believe you should do that. I think you should not buy them. And I think it's an otherwise cringe brand. Regardless, it's always been this way. They have these stupid stunts. It's the veteran worship is like a major problem in a society. It's not saying that like veterans are a problem. Of course, no one's saying that. And I think a lot of guys who served in combat, they have an experience that most Americans, and many of them are in their 20s and 30s and 40s. Most Americans of that age group don't have can't relate to that. That is a unique experience that they have. And most of those guys are going to be right wing and have the right values. And also, these guys were betrayed by the empire. Like, these guys gave their youth and some of their best years of life, and for a cause that they don't even know, and our system can't even articulate what they fought for. And they come back, and there's a lot of adjustment problems for that. And so, but I mean, that's regardless. I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with veterans themselves, but the veteran culture that is built around them and this veteran idolization, it is a problem because it doesn't just come around to, respecting these guys' service and particularly if they served in combat. Men are always going to respect warriors. I mean, that's been ever since man has been around. We've respected warriors. We valued their, expertise. That's just the nature of men. And it's seen as like the highest peak of masculine activities. We're always going to admire that aspect. But at the same time, it's not just simply about that. It is, celebrating the empire's ventures. It is like saying, like, we're so badass. Like, this is great that we have a country that can send, troops into Afghanistan to kill some villagers to bring democracy to them. This is awesome. This is badass. This is what we need more. And a lot of these guys, especially the ones who build, a brand around veteran culture, are, super into the empire's ventures. Marcus Luttrell, who actually, he was turned into one of the poster boys of veteran culture. He's a Navy SEAL who was ambushed in Afghanistan. His story became Lone Survivor, big movie, best-selling book. And a lot of people were pointing out how his story is actually a little exaggerated. In the movie, you think that hundreds of Taliban fighters descended on this small platoon of SEALs I think there's like 3 or 4 of them, and Marcos Luttrell was the only survivor. But they took down like 60 Taliban with them. Reality, it's likely that they were taken out by a squad of 7 to 10 Taliban fighters. Not as lopsided, and it was a complete disaster for the military. When they were sent to rescue Luttrell and the survivors, a helicopter was shot down by the Taliban, killing all who was in the helicopter, and he was only saved by a local Afghan villager. It's not necessarily quite the story that Lone Survivor portrays it as, but there is this mentality that these operators are total super soldiers, almost like superheroes from movies, and this is how all the movies portray them. American Sniper was another movie that emblazoned a similar portrayal of another Navy SEAL, Chris Kyle, and even that story had a lot of inaccuracies in how they depicted him. And this is ups, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to have like these, heroic fighters who are mowing down tons of people. I mean, that's always been a standard part of literature, especially if it's intended for a nationalistic purpose. I mean, if you look at the Song of Roland from the Middle Ages, Roland, who's one of the, Charlemagne's chief lieutenants, is mowing down hundreds of Muslims he's fighting with. He's just like a super warrior. That's a very similar thing to what we're seeing, today with, Lone Survivor and American Sniper. But it's not necessarily true. And at the same time, it's celebrating these ventures of the empire. Even though I know, American Sniper had a little bit more of a criticism of the efforts that went into Iraq, but at the same time, it's like, wow, it's so cool. We're killing jihadis in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're protecting our country. We're defending our land. And it's like, we didn't have to go into Iraq. Iraq wasn't posing any threat to us. And we're there, and we're, a lot of these people are just fighting for their own country. And these soldiers that are killing them, they don't even know what they're fighting for. They're just there, and their government is telling them, these colors don't run. Make sure to defend our freedom in, middle of nowhere Afghanistan. And a lot of these movies convey this message. But even with Luttrell, there was an interview he did with Jake Tapper, and Tapper asked him about, what do you think about, should we pull out of Afghanistan? And Tapper is the biggest, like, veteran suck up there is. Like, he's always, I love the veterans. I respect them. And this is why you need to respect me, Jake Tapper, because I respect the veterans. And Luttrell went off on him on the fact that he would even dare question the mission to Afghanistan. He got really mad that anyone would question the need for America to stay there forever. And so that's what you see in a lot of the culture that's promoted by these veteran brands. And so it's support for the empire. I mean, it's tied in with that, and it's even if you could look at some of the ads that Black Rifle Coffee does, like they did this horrifically cringe ad for July 4th just a few weeks ago, where it's really this patriotism that's, nothing is respectable about this. There's nothing serious in this. Even though, yeah, a lot of these guys, they of course served, and a lot of them served in combat. They gave, they have the right to call themselves. I mean, if you're basing it on service, they do have a say that, like, I did serve my country. But at the same time, like, their patriotism is like, it's like a cornucopia of races and colors, like getting together with like goofy, like American flag attire stuff, like American flag suit jacket with American flag swimming trunks, and they're shooting guns and eating bacon, and this is what America is all about. And it's it's just so goofy, and it's tied in with consumerism, and it's not even respectful admiration of this country. There's no reverence paid for the founding fathers or anything. It's just it's an advertisement to sell you products, and that's what their patriotism comes down to. And they have to appeal this not necessarily veterans themselves, but people who worship veterans. There was another company that was interviewed or covered in the New York Times report. It's covering all these veteran companies and how it's a booming business, and it's like Grunt Style, and they sell a lot of clothing that resembles like the training gear of guys in the military. And it says in their ad is like, you don't have to be a veteran to wear grunt style. You just need to love freedom, bacon, and whiskey. And you're just like, um, come on. And it goes along with this like conservative performative masculinity that I was talked about last week. It's their masculinity is tied into with their beards and their bourbon and their bacon and the guns they're shooting, and not necessarily, as I said, there's of course nothing wrong with gun culture. Culture is good, but it is a way of just saying like I'm a super manly man because I'm emulating veterans and I've got this operator beard and you need to respect me. And I've got even the sunglasses they type of wear. It's all rooted in consumerism and ultimately supporting the globalist American empire. I mean, you can't have these super warriors without current American foreign policy, and thus, if you're, going crazy over the super operator, you're at the end of the day, you're implicitly backing, these foreign interventions where we're sending soldiers to Africa for some reason, and we're building up troop deployments in places our troops don't belong. And that's what's all developed. So there needs to be something different. I mean, there is this desire for a masculine culture for ordinary men. And a lot of guys get into this because, they're in their 30s, they're getting kind of fat. The youth is going away and they, try to, LARP as something that they're not. There's not that many masculine avenues left, and so they get into this culture that's about having a beard, having bacon, and having bourbon and shooting guns. I mean, not necessarily this is the worst thing in the world, but it is like even though I said this phrase too much last week, it is performative masculinity without actually being actual masculinity, because they're not actually the ones firing weapons at enemies. They're just living vicariously through those who do. So there does need to be this end of worship of veterans. And we can still respect their... So I'm not saying like don't respect it. It's like, oh, you came back from 6 combat tours. You loser, you pussy. I'm not advocating that. I just think it's... You could see their experience and respect what they went through. But it's also at the same time... You shouldn't necessarily go up and say thank you for your service, because at the end of the day, they weren't fighting for your freedom and defending you over in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're fighting for the people who've got their boot heel on our necks right now, and they helped serve their interests. And a lot of these soldiers know that. I think a lot of soldiers know this. They're not necessarily thinking, buying the bullshit and believing the propaganda, even though Black Rifle Coffee seems to support this. They know the truth as well, but it's also, I think that thank you for your service and just this, going crazy over the veterans. It needs to, it needs to be restrained. It needs to be pulled back. And if you look at like the veterans who run for office, they're mostly terrible. You got like Dan Crenshaw, Adam Kinzinger, even though John McCain, of course, was from a different generation of veterans, that he also played into that. And every person who's like, I demand you respect their service. They're generally, and you can't criticize them, generally is not very good. And you have to look at what the military leadership thinks of ordinary Americans. Mark Milley, was revealed last week, was calling the Trump supporters Nazis. He's like, we fought these guys in World War II, and we're going to have to fight them again. And that's why we need to use our whole military to occupy Washington, D.C. to prevent these Nazis from showing up. And the people he mentioned are like Proud Boys, who are multicultural, multiracial. They at pains to say how they're not Nazis and not racist. And yet, Mark Milley and the rest of military leadership, thinks that they're they're Nazis and they deserve violence. And this is how the military views us, is that, they just view us as the enemy. And a lot of times you need to realize that like those guys in uniform will gladly shoot you. They're not going to pull off this based and red pill coup against the libtards. There are the libtards. If they did and I think even I was thinking about situations that would have happened, if the election was cast more into doubt, or the system had a better way of saying the 2020, or it was harder for the system, say in 2020, that Biden had won, that there were still counting votes, or there was like an even split, dead heat, where it's like 269 for Trump, 269 for Biden. There was no clear leader. I could have very well seen the military just pull off a coup against Trump and displace him for Biden, and then sending troops out to shoot like Trump supporters. Like, that's a very realistic scenario. That's far more realistic than them, overthrowing, the liberals in charge. They would use their power against us if we threatened, the system. And that has to be taken into account when you're, going up to any soldier in uniform. You're like, thank you for your service. You got to remember is that these guys, they're not necessarily serving you. They're not serving the American people. They're serving the globalist American empire, and they're furthering their interests. That doesn't mean they're bad, or that doesn't mean we can't respect what they did in the service. But that does need, this, because that gives them the argument all the time. Is like, well, I fought for your freedom, and you're so ungrateful, and you need to listen to everything I say. And I'm like, no, I don't. No, we don't. We can. That's great. That's very. We respect what you did. That's an experience that we may not share, that, serving in combat. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you can come here and tell us that we need mass immigration and we need to support Black Lives Matter and that we need more tech censorship and we should have had soldiers lining up and shooting the January 6th protesters. No, I'm not. I don't need to listen to that. I may respect what you did, but no thanks for your service. And I think that needs to be the real message around it. So I think the veteran culture, it is an inevitable result of, our foreign interventionism post 9/11. And it's not necessarily good because it does support American foreign policy implicitly, even though a lot of these guys may say, oh, I came, to look away from, question what we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. Ultimately, it's about supporting, throwing the American military machine and all these random places in the world and fighting for freedom and spreading democracy. And that's not in the interest of the American people. And so veteran worship, even though most veterans a lot of them are good people, great people, and a lot of them share our beliefs and values, veteran worship does lead to, the place where we're sucking off on John McCain and we think Adam Kinzinger and Dan Crenshaw should be like leaders of our country. And we're like saluting Mark Milley as he's ordering soldiers to fire upon us. So, that's what you need to keep in mind when you're thinking about that. And that's ultimately the thing, culture and purpose around Black Rifle Coffee. And that's, disregarding their opinions about how they could look upon average conservatives who sympathize with Kyle Rittenhouse's plight. You need to look at what this veteran culture promotes, and it is not something that is conducive to a genuine American nationalism, or to American nationalism that can actually free our people from the subservience to the globalist American empire, to the regime that we hate and the system that's around us that's imposing Black Lives Matter idolatry upon us. We need to sit back and look at the situation and realize, like, maybe this is a little bit dangerous to engage in this type of worship of veterans, that is, and American military interventionism. So that's my final thoughts about that. And I'm going to move along to another topic that is also coming from off on a subject I talked at length last week. I'm going to keep this brief. On Friday, the Pope Francis announced that he was going to restrict the Latin Mass, which I should have waited to do my segment on Catholics until after this, because a lot of what I talked about last week, played in this situation that we're seeing in the Vatican and with American Catholicism in general. Now, the Latin Mass restrictions aren't 100% clear yet. I mean, most of the bishops are saying, like, well, we're going to consider this. We're going to figure out what's the best way to follow these orders. What are we going to do for right now? We're going to continue to allow traditional Latin Masses to carry on in our diocese. There's been a few dioceses that have completely restricted the Latin Mass in regular parish churches. I mean, it'll still be allowed in these Latin Mass orders such as, FSSP and of course the SSPX, which has a little bit different standing with the church, very complicated standing with the church. It's not necessarily in schism, but it's not wholly dependent on Rome. It's very complicated. Even like as an outside observer, can't fully figure out. But they are, they have their own interesting status. And so those likely won't be affected. What it looks like it'll take place is they're going to force bishops to shut down the Latin Mass in ordinary diocese churches, and it'll be left only, some of it looks like the restrictions that they're going to put them in like basements or in smaller chapels. They're not going to be able to use the regular churches for their service in the regular times. They'll still provide a Latin Mass, but it won't be as it was before. If you go to necessarily an FSSP parish, everything will be the same. And it's also going to be harder for these Latin Mass groups to obtain churches going forward. There's, a greater emphasis on telling bishops not to grant that unless, there's extra special permission. So it is, the Pope is like sending a blow to the Latin Mass movement. And, this was a huge deal on, not even just like Catholic Twitter, but on conservative Twitter. There was all these Daily Wire writers. You're finding out like every, Gentile who works at Daily Wire goes to a traditional Latin Mass. And it looked like the same in all these other places. And they're having a meltdown saying, and it was like a lot of the things I've argued that there is, people looking at Twitter or their own personal experience without looking at the greater expanse of what American Catholicism is, and they're all insisting that this is bringing young people back, that there's like tons and tons of young people back. And I mean, from what I gather and from people personal experience and from people who told me, there is a greater skew towards younger people at these Latin Masses. More people are attending, likely as a result of 14 years ago Pope Benedict issuing his order that encouraged the development of Latin Mass, so more people are going to that and choosing that. But that's not the young American Catholic experience. The young American Catholic experience is becoming lapsed or only going in Christmas and Easter, and the masses they attend are like guitar masses if they ever go. I mean, that is something to keep in mind with the great majority of American young Catholics, but there is a significant subculture of young Catholics who greatly enjoy the Latin Mass. But these conservative Catholics made it seem like this is there's going to be a major schism threatened in the church. There is a major schism threatened in the church, but it's something on a completely different matter. Wall Street Journal had this big article, and there's been several coverage of what's going on in the German church, is that, there's a lot of bishops and priests there who want to recognize gay marriage, and they want female priests. And Vatican's like, we absolutely will not allow this, but they're not doing anything about the German church going forward with recognizing gay marriage. And a lot of people have pointed out that, they're coming down hard on Latin Mass, but they're doing nothing about the German church. Well, there's a difference in numbers. As I said last week, in my podcast, there's about 100,000 traditionalist Catholics in America who attend Latin Mass. Throughout the world, there's... it's hard to find what the exact numbers around the world, but maybe at most, under 1 million. It's probably safe to say it's probably under 1 million throughout the world. Maybe even less than that. While there are 22 million German Catholics. And the, push for this pause in the church is supported by a lot of German Catholics. And they're at risk of losing... there's already declining numbers, and a lot of these German Catholics don't attend regularly, but they do attend at Christmas and Easter, and they still contribute money. There is a risk that they could lose half of that, like 11 million members over this, or even more, and that could start a movement in all these European and, Western countries, or historically white countries, to leave the church in order to better support gay marriage, which is the complete opposite of what's being... implicated by a Latin Mass schism. So this is a major concern, and the church is trying to placate the Africans who of course don't want gay marriage recognized, and they want a more conservative church, not necessarily with Latin Mass. They want it in their own vernacular and more syncretism with African traditions. but it would not be recognizing gay marriage or female priests. And they're trying to balance that with the demands of these priests in Europe and America and North America who want, greater liberalization. So there's all these conflicts going on with the church, and the Latin Mass one is something that's impacting. It's a sizable minority, but it's a very small minority. But when they look at the problems of a church that represents 22 million people versus a traditionalist movement that represents 500,000 people throughout the world, they're looking at the numbers. They see that it's they have to have a greater worry to placate these libtards than they do Latin Mass attendees. So it is like Francis flexing, and he's trying to keep this unified church, but the church is moving. A unified church is moving in a direction I think a lot of trads and a lot of people on the right wouldn't like. It is becoming a religion that is trying to be amenable to globalism and support interests outside of Europe, outside of the Western world. And a part of that is maintaining this delicate balance with unity. And it's easier for him to flex on Latin Mass attendees than it is for him to flex on liberal bishops in Europe. So I'll definitely keep an eye on this. It'll be interesting to see how the church enforces the order. Whether they just issued it and then life carries on, but there's going to be fewer. The growth of Latin Mass is going to be stymied to a certain extent, or whether they're going to go into a full-out suppression mode. We'll have to look and see. But moving along, now another case of anarcho-tyranny in the UK. This is a little bit of an old issue because this happened last week, but it didn't really break out to the fore until after I recorded, and so I wanted to really cover this issue. In the Euro Cup final with England versus Italy, the English team was let down by its 3 black players. They put them at the end for the intended purpose of showing black people won us the game. Blacks won. This is our new nationalism. This is our new patriotism. It's multicultural, multiracial. The coach of the team, Gareth Southgate, had made it clear that he wanted his team to present a new type of nationalism, a new type of patriotism, and a new type of English identity that was centered around these concepts. And what better way to do that than to give black people the opportunity to win the game from England? Unfortunately, all 3 of them missed their penalty kicks at the end, and Italy won the game. And a few people on Twitter, this narrative was already set in stone at the end of the game. At the very end of the game, they're like saying, this is going to lead to more racism. And there were a few like Instagram comments and Facebook and Twitter comments hating on these guys because they're black. Few racially insensitive things were said about them, but this was turned into to England's and really, United Kingdom's January 6th. That this was the greatest insult that ever happened in this country. This is so shameful that anyone would attack these great players, even though for just making a mistake. So now Britain is using this excuse to wage they've already been waging a domestic war on wrongthink, but to escalate it. Now they're demanding that social media companies do more to censor. They're considering passing a bill that would fine social media companies for not censoring hate speech. Boris Johnson said that all fans who are found guilty of racist abuse would be banned from football games for life. They would never be able to go to a football game ever again. Because of racist abuse. I think there is some debate whether of how long a period. Boris Johnson may have not suggested permanent ban, but there are people calling for a permanent ban, and he did call for a ban on them, but it may have been a shorter than a lifetime. And this is the type of country that they're now living in. Is that I always say that in Anglophone countries, Canada is probably the worst. But UK is worse than America. Like, there is something weird. Is like, one thing is like you very rarely see racial abuse or whatever they want to use, the term they want to call it, in American sports, even though the players are overwhelmingly black, like very few times do people, a black player misses a catch, and they can't really find any time that there's like multiple comments of these guys calling them a racial slur. But anytime in Europe you can find that with soccer, with soccer, no matter the country, even though they blew the so-called racial abuse way out of proportion. I mean, if you looked at the figures, they could only find not that many comments compared to the moral panic that they're creating over this. They don't really have the evidence and the data to support the moral panic, but they're going to make one anyway. But that just does not happen in American sports. I think it's ultimately due to American sports sims having are just being told way more politically correct than European soccer fans. Even though I don't like soccer, and I'm glad that Americans will stop tweeting about soccer following Euro, but I imagine people will start talking about it again when the Olympics start up. It is good that Americans stop talking about it, but I will admit that European soccer fans seem to be much better than American sports fans of any league. It's much more tied to their community. They're much more willing to notice things that American sports sims won't, and they seem to be more the problem. That like the reactionary base, especially in the UK, seems to be centered around soccer. And no, I will not call it football. I'm calling it soccer. And in many other countries, these local football club supporters are generally there are some exceptions, which some football clubs have a more left wing base and some have a more right wing base. But you do have those right wing bases, and these guys will go out and protest, left wing overreach. I mean, last summer, these soccer fans were going out to defend British statues from vandalism and from Black Lives Matter. You would not see that among American fans. American fans would be going to join them in their oversized NFL jerseys and their cargo shorts. Would be going out with their out there their fat ass and trying to pull down the statue with Black Lives Matter, because they are much more brainwashed by ESPN propaganda than European soccer fans. And maybe that is due to most fans. Sports attachment isn't necessarily tied to an authentic community where they have like long-standing ties to the city. Their grandfathers, great-grandparents have all lived in the same city, and the reason why they rally around their team so much is because it is an expression of their local regional identity. While here they may be a fan of the Chicago Bears because they grew up in Chicago or whatever, but it's not really like tied to local regional pride and like a type of mini nationalism that you would see in other countries. And this could be definitely seen in the type of nationalism encouraged by international games and these Euro Cups. And all these Euro Cup, it does bring out these nationalist forces within European countries, and so does the World Cup. But here it's like it encourages libtards to engage in this ironic patriotism that I was talking about in the Black Rifle ads. It's like wearing goofy American style clothing and etc. But it's all just like libtards LARPing and the type of nationalist fashion that European soccer fans engage in. It's not very serious. I mean, you could compare this is when America won the Women's World Cup in 2019. All the American fans began chanting equal pay. And this is just like so typical of the American soccer fan. It's like the most cringe libtards imaginable. While in like Europe, it's people who will start chanting, go engaging in racist chants against like black players they don't like, or will engage in like a lot of other politically incorrect behavior, or will display banners celebrating nationals heroes. And the complete opposite will happen here. There's not this. None of these international events really serve up, an authentic, strong nationalism that is any way right wing. It's really just something like a consumer brand nationalism, if anything, that's encouraged by these international games. But it's very different in Europe. So that is one thing to look at. And I think it is funny. I think England, Britain was waiting for the opportunity to have its own January 6th moment to push through a greater authoritarianism, and they're using the dumbest possible thing. It's like just like a few hundred people making racially insensitive remarks is now all the encouragement they need to have a revolution against their own people. And this is being done by a conservative government, no less. And even these liberals there are blaming the conservative government for not supporting black players taking a knee during at the beginning of games. And even their comments were much less were more measured than the type of criticism American sports players receive from Republican politicians for taking a knee for the anthem. So yeah, I mean UK, great country. Yeah, I always have to say, if you ever get too down on America, just look at Canada, just look at the other Anglophone countries, and yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean we're the greatest country on earth, but we are better than the other Anglophone countries, especially Canada, and it looks like especially the UK. So that's something to keep. That is, I guess, a minor white pill to keep in there, is that we don't have a moral panic over one person complaining when Cam Newton has a bad game and saying like a racial slur, that it doesn't inaugurate this whole fanaticism to wipe out any type of racial comments from the internet, which is what they're doing in the UK. Now for the last topic before our cognitive elite question. This is a really funny one. Over the weekend, a porn star, Brandy Love, attended the TPUSA Student Action Summit as a VIP. She was welcomed there with open arms, at least initially, until people realized, hey, you have a porn star as a VIP at this event that's supposed to be about social conservative values, and you have all these speakers who supposedly espouse those values. And sure enough, they revoked her VIP pass, and it's created a hilarious internet controversy over whether porn stars should be allowed in conservative movement. There's been some big names such as Ben Domenech, Jesse Kelly, who have said that she should have been allowed to attend. Many others, Matt Walsh. A couple of other big names have said that no, we shouldn't allow porn stars. Eric Erickson, other people I've mentioned throughout the podcast saying cringe or somewhat cringe things were saying that no, porn stars should be allowed. And this was the original uproar was caused by groypers there. Making fun of the fact that they had this porn star. And the funny thing about Brandy Love is she's 48 and she's still doing porn. And it's what the hell? And her pinned tweet is it's a picture of her ass and vagina just sticking out in a pool. And you're what is this? She's got an OnlyFans, and it's just so comical. It's not even a reform porn star. I know Jenna Jameson is become is now a big conservative figure, and she no longer does porn, and she's not this is not a real defense. I'm not defending, but it's she doesn't have pornography on her page. Doesn't have OnlyFans, at least as far as I can remember. I think the last time I saw her account was in 2019. She's talking about getting religion and stuff, and she's whatever, my past is my past. You probably still not want Jenna Jameson at your event. But at the same time, this is somebody who is not an active porn star, and you could say, well, she no longer does porn. She even maybe she even does some criticism of the porn industry, and she's doing other things. She's found God, and you're oh, maybe it's okay that she has it. No, this is a woman who's still doing porn at 48, and is and it's really gross stuff she's doing. Come on. And an OnlyFans is come on. Why would you have this person at your event? And some people were just defending it. There's real no defense of it. And it's even regardless of your social conservative values, because there's clear things about it. You don't want to encourage pornography use among you shouldn't say that pornography is a good lifestyle and a good way to make a living among your movement. But even just beyond that, it's it just shows you as a clown. There's nothing serious to be learned from a porn star. There's not. It makes you look disreputable. It makes you look like a clown show to have just like all these freaks wandering around and these people outside the mainstream to like be there and just like be a porn star. And maybe not the best setting. I mean, it's not like this person can of course enjoy conservative content, I guess, but you don't necessarily want to put this person as like the fore of like a representative of your movement, especially when you're like running a youth movement that's centered around high schoolers and college students. She's also 48. It's like she's nowhere close to being a college student, and so this is this is just like how ridiculous the conservative movement is that they would just allow this, and then it becomes a controversy. I think it should have been very clear by everyone that highlighting a porn star and giving her like a platform is not what the conservative movement should do, but this apparently is a controversial point. Brandy Love is representative of what has been termed the barstool conservatism. This is a term which I think there is a lot of truth that this is like the next future of conservatism. It's more socially liberal in a lot of things on like what has traditionally been associated with social conservatism. Like it's not very much concerned with gay issues. It's much more lax on sexual morals. Obviously by the embracement of a porn star. It's mainly focused on some of these issues. It still focuses on some of the identity and cultural issues. They're not necessarily going to be supportive of Black Lives Matter, even though I think Barstool was more supportive of Black Lives Matter than what the Barstool conservatives would actually be. They're kind of just focused on what Brandy Love calls constitutional conservatism or Kid Rock conservatism. It's skewing social conservatism in favor of. It's not exactly clear what it's in favor of. Even though Brandy Love's had some interesting tweets where she asked like Ben Shapiro, like, what's more important, Israel first or America first or God or country? It's like that is a little interesting. She asked Ben Shapiro that. She's like, I'm a huge fan. By the way, do you put Israel first or America first? It's like, that is an interesting question come from Brandy Love. I don't think that's a reason to say support her, but that's her form of constitutional conservatism. So there is this conflict between social conservatives and barstool conservative, which is not necessarily the best way to describe it. I mean, it's a much better way to describe it than libertarianism, because these people aren't necessarily libertarianism. They really like Trump. They like his brand of politics. They'll probably even be down with some of his economic agenda. They'll, of course, be supportive of immigration restriction and other things that, you may not associate with the libertarians of the past. But it is, like Trump himself, it's banging porn stars or being porn stars. And at the extreme end, I don't think I would say most barstool conservatives are not porn stars or engaged in pornography. But it is a difference between social conservatives. And at the end, one of the things is, like, social conservatives at the mainstream end are losing this fight. I don't think it would have, there would have never been a time at CPAC where they would have invited as a VIP a porn star. Up until now. Now that's a realistic proposition. Now that we're seeing that at the major conservative events. And you wouldn't have seen people defend that invite either. Everyone would have come down on it. And you're seeing people who are surprised who are not necessarily libertarians. They're not Cato or Reason types. And somebody like Jesse Kelly usually says a lot of good stuff. He's about as good as you can expect from a mainstream conservative. And he's defending Brandy Love. So there is something to say that, there is a greater acceptance of this stuff, even though social conservatives at this time are becoming more, compared to in the 2000s and 2010s, much more concerned with pornography than they ever were over the last 20 years. I mean, this is a recent phenomenon around 2018, for all these calls to ban pornography. But at the same time that they're doing this is a very much of a phenomenon within the conservative intelligentsia. The rest of society is moving in a different direction. Not necessarily saying this makes porn good. This is just like the data. I look at the data from, like 30 years ago. There was a pretty good majority of Americans who supported banning pornography outright or placing severe restrictions on it. Now in our society, it's close to nearly 70%, roughly 70% believe pornography should be legal, at least for adults. At least for adults, which, that wasn't necessarily the case in the 80s. And in the 80s and 90s, the religious right was mobilized to argue for pornography bans. This was one of the defining issues for the moral majority. Several religious institutions were united in this. This could bring Catholic churches and Southern Baptists together, and this was one of their core demands, is to ban pornography. You don't really, even though the religious right still doesn't like pornography, they themselves are not getting out the grassroots to, push for pornography bans, and there's not really a push among politicians that represent them to make these demands. It's something that you will see written in articles for the Federalist and First Things and American Conservative, but it's not actually, and you're certainly going to see more of these than you would have 10 years ago, but that doesn't necessarily translate into what the grassroots is demanding. And I think if it, you did have a pornography ban was proposed, we're living a very different time period from the 80s. People in the 80s, if you were proposing a pornography ban, we're banning harmful, obscene content, they would understand that wouldn't restrict ordinary free speech that somebody would find politically incorrect. Now they would say, they're like, oh, you're trying to protect obscene, harmful content? What about hate speech? What about racism? What about disinformation? These are all obscene, harmful content that hurts the body politic. These upset the common good. We should restrict that, and not necessarily pornography. Like, people are just having fun. Like, why do you want to do that? And that does lead into the argument no matter how disgusting and wrong pornography is, the argument's made to demand a ban for pornography. We do have laws in the books that they could use to restrict it, and make it harder to access pornography and distribute pornography. There are some rules that we already have. They're just not enforced. But to make additional rules and to really make this a central point of conservatism, you run the risk of supporting efforts to curtail free expression, namely to ban hate speech, which is, ensuring that we're allowed to speak in public and to share our views and to not have this totalitarian system eliminate all of our thoughts and ideas from the internet. That is more important right now than banning pornography. And now that's not necessarily saying that we should not, like in an ideal society, of course we would ban pornography. And if we had a better system, we could advocate for banning pornography without running the risk of having our own thoughts and speech banned. But right now, if you're looking at what the elite consensus and the people in power see as obscene content, they do not see it as whatever Brandy Love is making on OnlyFans or ungodly stuff that she's making elsewhere. They see it as what we're saying right now. They see it as this podcast. They see it as what we're tweeting out. They see it in Donald Trump's speeches. That's what they want to restrict. They don't care about restricting. They don't see pornography as obscene. They just see it as a distraction for people to, come to terms with the current society. If they're depressed and miserable, here's some pornography to allay your troubles. They don't want them to learn. They don't want them to interact with our speech because that actually threatens them. And so that's what the one thing you have to worry about is when you're calling for the suppression of obscene material, you are inadvertently and unfortunately supporting arguments to censor us. So that is something to remember about the porn debate. And like we do need to have criticism of porn. I think porn is a huge problem in our society. I also, at the same time, don't think we should elevate porn stars or anyone involved in the pornography industry as conservative leaders or conservative figures. But at the same time, there needs to be some awareness of what, banning porn one of the central focuses is because one of the big things we have to fight for is free speech. And if, the cost of like ensuring that we're allowed to speak on Twitter and, the internet and having, right to a bank account means that, we'll have to, ignore pornography for the time being or to open restrictions of it, maybe that might be the cost. And people would say, well, they're going to censor us anyway. Well, there can be a time where the state, the government starts arresting you, which we're for your speech. We're not there at that point yet, even though the January 6th hoopla is showing, could push us in that direction. We're not there yet. And, if you're having like passing laws to arrest pornographers, not the worst thing in the world. In an ideal society, we probably would do that. More likely the arguments and precedent set by that would go into supporting hate speech laws. I also don't see that it's like there's a popular enthusiasm for it. Unfortunately, I mean, you do have to educate the public first before you go into, banning it outright. And I think it is due to a large part into the growing secularization of our society. And there is a live and let live policy, even among like Trump nationalists, even when it comes to gays and other things. Like 6 years, before gay marriage, you could be, you could rail against gays as a Republican politician. Now every Republican politician talks about how pro-gay they are. And that is not necessarily, that is an imposition done by the Supreme Court, but that also is reflecting of broader cultural trends. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to approve it, but it does need to create awareness of some of the limitations we have as a political movement and what should we advocate for. And we should have definitely criticized pornography and show the harmful effects of it. And, in an ideal society, we should work towards banning it. But in terms of immediate threats and problems that we have, protecting free expression and not giving government ammunition and the people in power arguments to censor our quote unquote obscene material seems like a more pressing matter. So I'm not necessarily doubting, not condemning people or wanting to ban porn. As I said, I would want to ban porn in an ideal society too. And it would be great if we could disentangle pornography from free speech, but that's just the nature of the society we live in. And so I'm not saying I'm not saying you shouldn't like tweet out ban porn. And it's still like funny content. It does like drive some like the wrong people mad or the right people mad. But yeah, I think of it as like advocating for a serious like political stance. If you're like building a political party or you're like expecting this as like one of the chief planks for a Republican politician, I think that's a little misplaced. I mean, unfortunately, in our stance and our weakened state, we have to hope that the government defends free speech, and unfortunately, pornography falls under the free expression category. And yeah, so that's just my thoughts on it. That's going to be controversial. But I think, but when coming back to the immediate concern about Brandy Love and like whether conservatism should embrace pornography, absolutely not. There should not be that. But the acceptance of pornography is starting to happen within conservatism. And even though there's this conservative intelligentsia pushback and demands for banning porn, at the same time, the general grassroots movement is not as offended by it as they would have been, 20 years ago. It'd been unthinkable for Brandy Love to show up at an event with, members of the Bush family being present, but members of the Trump family, that's a much more expected thing to occur. So that's just the state of conservatism right now. Now, finally, we come to the Cognitive Elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests, topics, or books for Highly Respected if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected Substack. This question comes from Alex. And now I warned Alex that he was probably not going to like the answer to this, but he went along with this question. He asked me to rate or to give my thoughts on Rage Against the Machine and System of a Down. I've been, well, if any of you guys have been following me for a while on Twitter, you will all know that I'm not a big Rage Against the Machine fan. I called them the most cringe band to exist. And I'm also not a System of a Down fan, but I would probably appreciate System of a Down a little bit more than Rage Against the Machine. So I guess I would give my thoughts on like why I don't like these bands. Rage Against the Machine is a souped up, dumber version of Gang of Four with rap vocals. If you don't know what Gang of Four is, they're a British post-punk band that added a lot of funk influences to their music. It's like their first album, Entertainment, is very good. I think their next two albums after that are pretty decent listen. I like them, but it's like a higher brow, more white version of Rage Against the Machine. While Rage Against the Machine is like the Amerimut, and both Gang of Four and Rage Against the Machine had left wing lyrics, but Rage Against the Machine is like dumber, meathead, Amerimut. Like I think most of the band, like you can't even determine what race they are. it's like the perfect Amerimut band, and like all their lyrics, like really phony rebellion. And their guitarist, he's still on Twitter. I mean, he's on Twitter all the time, and he's like talking about how much he loves Star Wars and retweeting anti-Trump resistance garbage, and even just like avoiding the politics. I just don't simply like the music. The music is like this kind of alternative hard rock metal that became very popular in the 90s, which I don't really particularly like. It's like it's in pushing in all these influences to negate the metal side of it and to make kind of like dumber riffs to like appeal to a lot of ways the lowest common denominator. It is like it is like the meathead music, because most meatheads aren't going to listen to like the really hard heavy stuff they're not going to listen to like Immolation or Bolt Thrower. They're going to listen to something that's a little bit more mainstream. They're going to listen to like the Black Album from Metallica, or they're going to listen to System of a Down to get them hyped up. Nothing wrong with that listening to the gym, even though I still think the music is terrible. And I also don't like the funk the influences. It's like, it just makes it sound stupid. And it's very not necessarily music that's very ambitious. Maybe that's the best word, because it is just revolving around verse chorus, and I hate Zach De La Rocha's vocals. It's like whiny rap. Like I'm a trust fund kid of dubious racial origins. Here, listen to me complain about the Zapatistas, and so I don't like Rage Against the Machine. It really is metal for normies, and I'm not for metal for normies. I'm for metal for metalheads. That's my stance. System of a Down, I would say I liked System of a Down when I was a real little kid, when new metal was really big. So this is like 2001, when I was like 10 or 11, and when their first album, The Toxicity, came out, I was like, oh yeah, I love System of a Down. System of a Down is definitely much more trying to be like, look at how smart we are. Like, look at how different we are. Like, wow, we're doing the spoken word folks. We're having really technical instrumentation. We're experimenting with different rhythm styles. It's not just the 4/4 rhythm. Like, look at how cool we are. This is like so technical. And by the way, we're Armenian too. We're going to talk a lot about being Armenian. And no. I would say in terms of like, if I'm gonna like, I want to go down memory lane, remember the glory years of the early 2000s, late 90s, I'd probably more likely put on Toxicity or Chop Suey from System of a Down than I would ever put on a Rage Against the Machine songs, as I just find like Rage Against the Machine is like too grady. I don't think System of a Down's politics are even that bad, even though like Armenian identity and stuff. Like, I don't think that's as insufferable as Rage Against the Machine's politics. It's like up in front. It's like the same, the same. You know, those who work forces are the same who burn crosses. Like, come on, this is in the saying this in the '90s. This is like a total joke. So yeah, I don't particularly like these bands, and it was this, you know, there was this conscious decision in the '90s to, and we talked about this in the Thomas 77 Metal podcast where we talked about new metal, is there's this conscious decision to merge all these popular styles of music into like one unholy combination. And you know, it was very much to represent the like multicultural America. I don't know if that was necessarily intended, but you know, it was representative of that fact. And you do have these bands, and there's like a Hispanic guy, there's a black guy, and there's like a white guy with dreadlocks, and they're all in this band together, and they mix in rap, funk, and some ripped off like Slayer riffs, and really bad Slayer Slayer riffs they threw in the recycle bin. And this is the music you're gonna listen to, and this is what new metal's about. And like the culture around it was very much like merging like wigger styles with like a degenerate, decayed working class tendencies, and merging that together. And it was something, you know, it's like instead of a white kid like growing his hair long and, you know, adopting something that like what you would think of as like, you know, this is like a white culture, this is a white style. Instead, they're like adopting these weird like cornrow dreadlocks that were big among these like these new metal bands, and you know they're emulating Ebonics and stuff. And yeah, there's a reason why we don't, you know, look that back that fondly on new metal, even though System of a Down and Rage Against the Machine are like the at the peak of respectability for new metal along with the Deftones. Like it's okay to listen to those bands. You don't want to necessarily listen to Limp Bizkit or Korn anymore. And even Slipknot is like, I've gone off on Slipknot in past episodes. You know, that's even like more disreputable. But yeah, you can still be have a reputable music taste if you listen to those three bands. Yeah, that's a part of it. So they definitely were trying to merge all this stuff, and it was, you know, I don't think I don't think it's aged well. Totally, even though a lot of people still like Rage Against the Machine and stuff, and I think that is due to, you know, people want energetic rock music to listen to at the gym that's like hyped up, it's active. And, you know, there's not that many choices today, even though active rock is still continuing. It really hasn't changed since the early 2000s. There's just less rap influence in it, which is interesting because there's now more rap influence in like something like country, but there's less rap influence among the active rock. You know, all those new metal bands are just not having rap vocals anymore, and there's less like less funk as well, less black style as well. It's more just like a straight late '90s Metallica that they're all emulating for the most part. I guess that's the best blueprint for it. And, you know, so people will listen to like, I want to listen to some rock music that's like get me energetic. You know, I don't necessarily want to listen to rap or gangster rap. You know, it's maybe not my thing. You know, it's like maybe I don't want to listen to these, you know, thugs in my headphones. So they turn on to rock music, and there's not that many opportunities. So people still listen to that stuff. So yeah, I'm not a fan of it. I will give this one System of a Down story. I got really horrified when, you know, I was on YouTube and they gave me this recommended viewership. I think I was listening to like some Dark Throne like synthwave track or something, and it had you know, System of a Down covers Dark Throne Transylvania Hunger. I was like, what the hell? This can't be real. And then I click on it, and it's something. It looks like it's from like 2001. I think it's like they're playing at Eindhoven. They're playing at one of the big metal festivals or big rock festivals in Europe. And like the guitarist is out there, and he's like, "This goes to Fenris of Dark Throne," and he starts playing the riff for Transylvanian Hunger. I was like, "Oh, God fucking damn!" And I was like, so bad. I was like, "No, they're ruining this." That like System of a Down covering Dark Throne. I'm a big Dark Throne fan. I like Dark Throne. And he's like giving a shout out to them. And most of the fans are probably like, who is Fenris? Who is Dark Throne? I doubt that most people who are listening to System of a Down in the early 2000s knew any of those references he was playing. And they certainly wouldn't have recognized the riff he was playing he just played it for like 30 minutes or or a minute, in between songs, and then they went into their normal repertoire. That video, I may share that clip, but I don't want other people to see it because it was. I don't want I didn't like the thought that System of a Down is listening to Dark Throne, but apparently they're big Dark Throne fans, and it doesn't reflect in their music, but I guess they're listening to it. So, concluding thoughts. I'm sorry, Alex. Not a big fan of Rage Against the Machine or System of a Down. Not into new metal. It's not my type of metal for various reasons. I think it's too, it is like something that is like corporations decided, all the big record companies decided that they needed a more accessible form of metal that combined a lot of styles that didn't necessarily mesh. And it's like, oh, it's this universal style of music that we just cobbled all together, and it should appeal to everyone because it's got a simple rock song format, and it downplays the riffs. It's more focused on these stupid vocal hooks that are rapped. Yeah, people will love it, and for a time period people did love it, but it hasn't aged well, and so I'm just not a fan of it. So sorry to Alex. No insult to your music taste, of course, or to those who like Rage Against the Machine or System of a Down. I would rate System of a Down a little bit higher. Less cringe than Rage Against the Machine, just for the simple, and I guess there is like an enjoyable nostalgia factor with their songs, much more so than Rage Against the Machine. So that is how I conclude Highly Respected. We're going to have another highly great IQ supplement later this week. It should come out on Thursday, so be on the lookout for that. And until next time, stay respected.